Hello, I'm Tobias from X-Dream Group, and I'm here today for the session about the benefits of multi-tenant hosted systems. I'm very happy to welcome with me Oliver from Flowworks and Spencer from... No, I'm lost. Spencer, please start. Squared paper.
Squared paper.
Excuse me. I was thinking about
Could
the
be
session
round
already.
paper. Hey, who knows?
Whatever you want.
Thank you very much and welcome. Could you quickly introduce yourself with 2-3 words, please? Spencer, maybe you start, since I treated you so badly at the beginning.
Squared paper. We do workflow systems, and that's it, really.
Very good. No, sorry for the irritation. Hello, Oliver. Could you quickly introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I hope I remember myself properly. Right. Hi, guys. This is Oliver speaking from Flowworks, calling from Munich. We're a specialist for MAM, PAM, workflows, ingest, outgest, basically monetizing content and the like.
Very good. So maybe we jump directly into the topic, since we have limited time and want to tease everyone. So, Oliver, what is a multi-tenant system? Could you quickly introduce that to us, please?
Well, it's as a concept, it's very simple to understand. You have one instance of a piece of software, but you have several groups on that very same instance. That's describing it from a technical point of view, and of course there are a number of different ways of you being able to make use of that. I personally think the more sexy part to a multi-tenant system is it allows you to make money, quite simply. I'll explain that a little bit later, but I think that's a key point.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the introduction. And Spencer, could you speak to us a little bit about how can we create such a system?
Well, there's really sort of two ways of doing this. You could just have one system which you share, or you can just share elements of the system. So one way of doing a multi-tenant system is to share the expensive parts. For example, storage systems, transcoders, very processor-intensive parts, while potentially keeping something separate. For example, the customer's metadata. And you can decide, really, in modern architectures, you can decide how you split those things up. And the advantage of doing the whole multi-tenant thing really is that you can share these expensive resources. That's the only reason to do it, so that you increase the return on your investment by investing once and using many times.
So, Oliver, and that means, like, at the end, everyone is on the same system, but how is everyone different? How can I reflect on that?
Well, let's take the example that you have a shared infrastructure. As Spencer was just explaining, you, for example, have a shared server, which we have quite a lot. We host a lot of our customers, and we asked them, would you like a dedicated service, or would you like us to share your service with others? And it simply reduces the cost, as Spencer just outlined. What that means in terms of differentiation is everybody really has their own system. If we're talking a split, I have one instance, but I have 3 different customers on that. Every customer will have its own database, it will have its own metadata structure, they'll have their own user rights engine, they'll have their own workflows, they'll have their separate ingest routines, they'll have separate processing routines, and of course, totally different outgest, play out or delivery routines. So everything is really separate, and it is each customer has an instance of his own, but technically they're actually sharing a lot of the infrastructure, exactly as Spencer's just outlined. But it's a total separation. There is no way that content might leak. There's no way that customer A can look into the group of customer B. A second and slightly different approach, but we have a lot of those customers too, is we have one instance and it's one company, but they have separate departments. Imagine you have your if you talk about a corporate, let's say, it's easier to understand that you have your marketing department, you have your sales department, you have your corporate department, you have your legal department, etc. And they may well have different media, and actually they do, you can easily imagine that. They might have entirely different metadata structure, and they will have different users. So that's another way of describing a multi-tenant system, where it's actually one company, but you can, if it's expedient, if it makes sense to you, subdivide that into departments, groups, functions. We have other customers who say we have one group for TV, the next for radio, the third for print. Of course, such a split makes a lot of sense because it's easy to navigate per department. But, and we do this also, we do want to make sure that some content can be shared across departments. So looking for some metadata which is uniform and identical, the structure is identical across all departments does make sense.
So you outlined also some, let's call it specifics of these hosted systems. Spencer, at the beginning, you mentioned quickly that the cost implication is the main advantage. Could you elaborate a bit more on the various advantages Oliver also started to name?
Well, if you're talking about a true hosted system, then you've got a massive advantage, which is that you have no capital expenditure. You've moved the whole thing into operational expenditure. So you're paying a regular fee to get the service, but you're not paying to either provide the equipment and the software, or indeed to look after it and maintain it. And those costs can be very high. I think the other thing is that the sort of speed of change in the industry at the moment means that the sort of traditional engineering process that people go through, where they select a solution, purchase it, install it, then they look after it, maintain it. That's very difficult to maintain at pace. So one big advantage of using hosted systems is that someone else is doing that for you, and they're doing it across multiple players, so the costs are lower. I think if it's in a cloud platform as well, scaling changes are very easy. If suddenly you need to do a lot more because you get more channels, or you need to do less because perhaps it's the winter and you're doing mainly summer sports, that kind of thing. You can adjust those scaling factors more easily than you can if you own and operate your own equipment.
Do you also think there is an advantage of speed in the way of that a hosting partner or the partner who hosts the system can be faster if you have, for example, new departments onboarding?
Absolutely, yes, of course. The time between making the decision and being up and running can be in a matter of days rather than months if you're having to acquire equipment, build apparatus rooms, that kind of thing. So,
I imagine especially these days when hardware is asked everywhere because everyone has to go sort of mobile or work from distance.
Yeah, that's almost a side effect. Because these systems inherently have to be remote, they have user interfaces and ways of connecting that make them very suitable for remote working. So the people who had systems that were built this way have been able to adapt, for example, to the pandemic very quickly, whereas people who had on-premises equipment with fixed user interfaces have found it much more difficult to extend that to remote workers.
So shifting to Oliver quickly, for instance, when you think about post-production surrounding and the various creative processes which happen traditionally, I'd rather say, than normally. I say traditionally on premise, yet not always. How can that be integrated?
Well, we're talking about a hosted system, so everything that Spencer just said, revving it up, revving it down, depending on your current production needs, makes a big difference. And of course, if it's hosted, that's going to be not your worry, that's not your headache, you just pay what you use. Bringing into that concept the multi-tenant idea, and I was saying this in the beginning, this is about making money, is we have customers whom we advised and we showed how to rent out the facility of the PAM per job they were taking on. So post-production was taking on a job to produce film XYZ, and of course as part of their service they told the producers, right, we'll host the whole post-production process with us. We'll make it transparent, and we will give you access to it. And they charged a small fee, of course, but nevertheless, they managed to charge something. Give you a slightly different example. We have advertising agencies who host production of adverts for industrials. What happens, and it happens frequently and quite easily, the end customer gets used to the idea of suddenly having a remote digital workflow, and he's seeing his own archived and production materials. He's not used to that in a lot of cases. People used to send around CDs or tapes before that. If you look at industry, they're still at that. Film post-production is much further down the road. But if you're a post-production, not just can you obviously integrate all your remote workflows quite easily, because as Spencer explained, with the ease of revving it up and revving it down in a hosted environment, think of it as a business opportunity to create, even just during the post-production, a miniature archive for your customer. And if you think a little bit further, you can extend that archive way past the actual production. Start hosting your customers. That's what multi-tenant is really good at, and that's actually a way of making additional turnover.
So does that also lead to the fact that it could be a help for on-premise traditional clients to migrate partly or generally to host it in the cloud solutions?
Well, I think it certainly is a help to migrating. If you're thinking about migrating and you've really thought it through, and you come to realize that it's not that easy, and just so many people said, "Oh, we're moving everything to the cloud," and then they've come back with a bit of a black eye because they weren't aware of what complications and costs, especially, they would meet. And they have very nicely worked out local on-premise workflows and an environment, and suddenly in the cloud that's not there, and they need to start adding stuff. It's not that simple. But especially for post-productions who may have peaks, I now have a production and I have a lot of work. Maybe use that peak to try this out. Just rent for the time that you're actually going to do that. Just run the production. Don't run the archive on there directly, because archiving in the cloud, for example, or hosted, can actually be more expensive than on-premise. But if you have a lot of collaboration, you have a lot of things coming in, you need a lot of people to look at these items. You basically need to manage a whole project. The project has a beginning and it has an end. During that time, try it out.
That's very animating. I think so too. Spencer, Oliver mentioned that in some parts that there might be some doubts, for example, at the beginning or general, because you're used to kind of an on-premise system which you know in and out, and so you also know about their control and their feedback from the system. How would that happen in a hosted system?
It should happen in the same way. Ideally, you should have comprehensive user interfaces, the ability to build dashboards so you can see what's going on with your content. And another thing I would require from any new system now is you should have really good REST APIs so that you can hook into the system and you can hook systems together, because the future of all this is having systems talk to each other. If you're passing spreadsheets from one place to another to convey information, you're doing it wrong. So it's really important to have this kind of tight API integration, and any hosting provider should provide you with really good APIs that you can talk to. You may not use them on day one, but they'll become really useful as you try and develop these systems and link things together.
So I believe this is also an advantage. We mentioned the cost savings. What other advantages, if we come to that, would you see?
Well, one of the things about a hosted system is that someone else is dealing with a lot of the bandwidth and connectivity, and they might even offer linking to surrounding software systems. So things like file accelerators could be provided. Portals are a particular thing which we've seen quite a lot, where in the hosted systems that we've been involved in, providing a customer portal that allows the customer's customers to access the system directly and have accounts, log in, see what is being done on their behalf. All of that sort of thing can take place without having to take up bandwidth on the customer's resources.
I see. Also, Oliver, staying a bit on the advantages, what other business chances wouldn't have been available without these hosted systems?
Well, again, I think the main feature to think about is the multi-tenant idea, the ability to simply create a group, be it just for a week or be it for 10 years, who knows, and sell that as a service to your customer. Exactly as Spencer just said, those portals, the service of giving your end customer transparency and access to the files, the status, maybe even being able to do some of the editing work like metadata himself, et cetera, et cetera. That's a really big business opportunity, and a lot of people don't get it actually. They're too caught up in daily work, and making life easier for your customer who's also working remotely. Keep that in mind, and making it more transparent for them is worth pure cash, hard cash. So that's something to certainly go for. Another consideration, because you asked about other business aspects on the cost saving side, of course, no matter what your on-prem system currently looks like, a hosted system which you buy as a solution as a service, will probably be much larger system with all the API connectors that Spencer was really referring to, much more of a Chinese menu approach. So there's a lot more modules for you to choose from, and modules that you may need very quickly because there's a job, you're pitching for it, but they demand that you do process X, Y, Z. You're not going to get that on-prem very quickly. But if you have a bunch of people like X-Dream Fabrik, for example, our joint effort, I mean, we're all specialists and we bring a lot to the party. So we have so many modules that we can simply just activate, versus you as a on-prem operator, you'd first have to buy, install, get to work, integrate, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there are numerous advantages. The multi-tenant thing is a very simple, straightforward, really good business opportunity. But the simple idea of having a hosted solution as a service, that's a larger picture. And if you really think it through, it's the better answer than simply saying, I'm taking my jobs to the cloud, because then you're still out there on your own. You want some partners to go there with you.
Very well. Partly during our exchange, we spoke about verticals, about industries. Spencer, and later also Oliver, could you name a few examples for which customers this definitely makes sense?
It makes sense for almost all customers, actually. I mean, anyone in the media space who needs to do media processing, media management, production asset management, this is a good way to go. There are some cases where there are legal requirements that mean you can't do it this way. You have to have something on premises, particularly when you're dealing with the motion picture industry, where it's just not acceptable for the content to be in someone else's hands in whatever form. And there are cases where an entity is so large that it makes sense for them to become a hoster of their own. The very large state broadcasters that we find in Europe, or the big studios that you find in the US, they're large enough to do this for themselves. But even then, a hosted solution is a good way of dipping your toe in the water, or dealing with some of the edge cases you have. The things that you have to spin up to deal with a particular production need. So I think that there's something in this.
Oliver, what would you add?
Well, I would certainly, that can just underscore what Spencer just said, but I'd like to add some stuff. Think of advertising agencies. Those guys produce enormous volumes of media every single day, and they do it on behalf of a lot of big industrial customers. Advertising agencies are not really known for being the core of IT know-how. They're more interested in ease of use, a high degree of automation, and the customers are exactly the same. So going to a hosted service which is properly done, like we would say X-Dream Fabrik is done very well, and combining that with the enormous potential of a multi-tenant business model, that's something that's really interesting for an advertising agency who, at the end of the day, don't just sell their creative work. They can sell consulting, but hosting your customer's archive. That will tie your customer in. It's a very appealing proposition for advertising agencies. They have sheer volume. They have very interesting customers who also have money, by the way. They have a high need for transparency and collaboration, a high degree of automation, ease of use, etc., etc., etc. That's a very interesting field. And of course, industrials themselves. Industrials are a fantastic market. They literally swim in oceans of media content. Maybe it's a lot more photo, of course, than a broadcaster would have, but they'll have lots and lots of videos. Believe me, we have a lot of big corporates, and it's getting more, and it's getting 4K, and it's getting 8K, and it's getting more complicated, and they are publishing in all sorts of channels, especially on the web. I mean, we have people like SAP. I think you have a chart there if you'd like to show that. Where we have a setup, it's a single customer, but they have multiple groups. So it's like multiple tenants who are editorial groups. And sitting above that, I don't know if you can show the chart there, Victor. Above that, you have a multitude of playout sites. There you see it. So that's a very simple example of, this is just one customer, but they've subdivided into groups, which is basically tenants, each of which has separate playout routes. Now, just imagine that if you are an advertising agency, you have your core system, the one core, and the groups is not within SAP, but it's customer A and customer B. You've just generated 2 additional income streams. Add some playout to that, and you've just created 6 additional income streams. So if you're an industrial, if you are an agency, if you work somewhere in that circle, there's a lot for you in a hosted system, because it's going to be very high end from a technology point of view, highly automatable, which is very important, but it really offers a lot of business opportunities too.
And Spencer, you named it before that I don't want to push anyone away, and I think all the 3 of us do not want to do that. However, there might be some examples like very big customers for whom a hosted system is not the ideal solution. Without pushing people away or customers, because we always like to exchange on every single case, could you just quickly elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, the solution can still be a similar solution. It just becomes a private cloud solution. You're just building your own cloud. You may decide to use a hosting provider, or you might host it internally. But you'll build the solution the same way. I mean, most modern solution builds really are built from the same principles that you would build a multi-tenant system from, even if they end up being running on servers in your own data center. You're still going to want to use virtualization, general purpose servers, those that have good APIs, all of those techniques. So you can still own it, but just use the same types of techniques as you would if you were building one of these multi-tenant systems.
So that means also both Flowworks as well as Squared Papers are the companies for that approach as well.
I'd say yes. No, I think, I think we can speak for even more than just the 2 of us. Spencer, if I may just include you. Some of our partners produce scheduling software. Others have ingest routes. Others do playout systems. Those are things that, in a complete media environment, you'll need that at some point. Maybe not right now, as Spencer rightly said, start small and grow the thing. But then you want to make sure that you have a pre-integrated set of solutions that you can just simply activate, and be it just activate that for a short period of time. So, the approach of saying we're going to offer a solution as a service gives you an awful lot of choice, and it gives you an awful lot of security. And because we can also do it via multi-tenant systems, it comes at a very attractive price.
However, exactly there, it sounds a bit like as if the customer would have to accept kind of a predefined system. What if the customer wants to have exactly the blueprint of his so far on-premise solution?
I think that's still okay. I mean, we're not saying that you have to accept a particular workflow system or a particular what you call a blueprint of how the thing works. It's just that a lot of the difficulties with systems come at the touch points. They come at the points where you integrate two things together, where they have to talk to each other. And so removing some of that headache and concentrating on the workflows and the business objectives makes for a faster and better solution. I mean, really, this stuff is there now. You don't have to invent it. We're not talking about people going out and having to sort of, like they did in the early days of television, invent everything before they use it. And you can largely create the workflows that you need to satisfy the requirements you have using systems that are available. You don't need to go and architect the whole thing from scratch.
Yeah.
Someone's done the hard work already.
Yeah, I think I'd really want to second that, because what we ask customers to do is to think about what is it that you're good at, where are you making money, where are you not making enough money. We will happily consult you on how we would solve that issue for you and what offers we can make. But of course, as a customer, you're totally free to listen to us and follow the proposition or don't follow the proposition. If you have a process and you love it and all of your staff loves it and they know how it works, don't change it. Maybe running it with slightly different technology, but as Spencer said, the workflow is decisive and the way people operate the system is decisive. But that can be replicated with pretty much any software, as long as, again, you have the API connections, and I think we all do.
And I think we should also add that monies can be proxied out. I mean, if you're a state broadcaster, then you're talking about service and how much of a service you provide. If you're a government department, you're talking about throughput, service, those things. So it's not always bottom line profit that you're looking at, depending on the entity that you are. But there's always something that you're trying to maximize. There's something you can measure and deliver on. And that's really how these systems can help you.
I can clearly feel, and I know that there are good teams behind you. So we've been elaborating on a lot of parts today. However, Oliver, is there something you would like to add that we didn't cover and that really belongs to this kind of looking at hosted and multi-tenant systems?
Well, I think one thing we haven't really touched upon is playout, monetization. We have a lot of customers, especially I keep citing that from the industrial side. They have an awful lot of content and they love the MAM system. They use it. They work with their agencies to produce new stuff. So we have a lot of ingest processes and, all of the classic MAM stuff that all of the producers or post-producers who might be listening will all know very well. But a quite decisive difference to that market is they play out a lot. Basically, they behave like media outlets. So they do an awful lot of publishing. They actually monetize their content because they might not be selling the content as such, but the content sells their wares. So media is maybe not their business, but media helps their business. And doing that in a cloud environment, a hosted environment, a dedicated hosted environment, doing play out in that is going to really take a lot of headaches out of trying to design, build, and then operate such a play out thing profitably. And we have a lot of big producers, rights owners who come to us and say, look, we need to get more visible. We need to show our wares better. There's no MIBCOM. What can we do to show our produce to the global purchasing clientele? And that all requires play out. So if you're already in a hosted environment, you're going to get there much quicker. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier. And again, with things like Fabric, you're tapping into a huge basin of knowledge and ability, lots and lots of modules you can choose from to activate and obviously configure to your needs.
Both of you mentioned X-Dream Fabric quite some times now. We look into that also quickly, but Spencer, maybe something you wanted to add which we didn't mention, and then maybe you can slightly shift to X-Dream Fabric and the kind of joint approach we did here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing that we found quite a lot is that again, outside of the sort of broadcast arena, for example, government departments, they just don't want to build media facilities. They don't want to be involved in that. They want someone else to look after it. So one of the major advantages of platforms like X-Dream Fabric is that you're not having to worry about how it works at all. And the days of every media company needing an engineering team are probably gone. You know, you don't need to do the engineering yourself. You can concentrate on the business, which is monetizing content or getting eyes on content or providing service to your clients. So, you know, that's really why you would switch.
And Oliver, concerning X-Dream Fabric, would you want to open up our listeners and viewers information spot a bit more about it?
Well, look, x-dream Fabric is I think it's an innovative approach because it basically speaks to you like the cloud. It basically says, just like Spencer said, you know, get rid of the worry of the hardware, get rid of the worry of the scaling up and down and all of that monitoring, get rid of all the administrative issues, for one. But two, you have a business process and you know how that works and you know where you're making money and you know where you're not making money or you're in fact paying too much money. Come and challenge us. Tell us what your business intentions are. Tell us how you think you can best make money. And it's up to us. And we're a big group of I dare say, really good looking and very smart people. We can come up with solutions for you. And we're not AWS. AWS will say, great, so how many servers would you like to rent? We wouldn't ask that question. We would say, how would you like to make money? And hence, what processes would you like run and how would you like them run for you? And then lastly, we would ask, so, oh yeah, great, what's the throughput? And we would simply calculate things like the traffic and storage and server capacities, not as an afterthought, but it's not the main thought. We're all about solutions. We're not just simply renting out. Fabric is not just simply renting out service to you. We're actually giving you expertise and functions and functional interconnected pieces of kit.
The important thing about that is it leads to predictable costs as well. So the cost model, if you just go to AWS or a hosting provider, you have no idea how much you're going to spend. And in fact, a lot of people have been caught by thinking that it's going to be very low cost and finding they're spending many, many, many times what they used to do with an on-premises environment. The advantage of a system like Fabric is that your contract and your billing arrangements are based on the media you're processing or the media that you're using. They're not based on some arbitrary number like CPU cycles or something, which you have no idea about. So you can predict your costs, and you can predict your costs very accurately. And in the world we're in at the moment, that's very important to know how much something's going to cost you before you use it, rather than just getting a bill at the end, or in the case of some hosting providers, just having the money taken from you.
Very good. I think we have to end this session. Thank you very much for the exchange and also for the promises you made to our potential viewers. So I also really want to invite everyone to connect separately or even jointly with Oliver and Spencer to go a bit into detail about this topic, maybe also break it down to your use case. We are very happy to do that. Please also check for the other sessions and join us also at the coffee bar or at the reception if you need further information. I was with Spencer from Squared Paper and Oliver from Flowworks. Thank you very much. My name is Tobias from X-Dream Group. See you soon.